Where's Thomas?
We're live. Hi everyone. Welcome to our YA panel. We're just waiting on Thomas Taylor because he's got some browser problems. He can't access this with Safari, so he's just downloading a new one, and he'll be joining us shortly. While we wait, Elly and Sophie, do you want to start off by introducing yourselves?
Yeah. Okay, I'm Elly Griffiths. Hello, lovely to meet you all. I'm the author of quite a few crime novels, probably better known for adult crime. I don't mean adult crime, I mean crime for grown-ups, including the Dr. Ruth Galloway series, which is now 12 books long, and I've just written number 13. But recently I've written a children's crime series, a children's murder mystery, really, called A Girl Called Justice. And the book 2 was out this year, and book 3, The Ghost in the Garden, is out next year.
And I'm Sophie Green. I am a children's author. I wrote the Potkin and Stubbs series, which is 3 books, which I have here. Potkin and Stubbs was the first one, and then Haunting of Pelican City, and then finally Ghostcatcher. They are hard-boiled crime for kids, or hijinks noir, as they have been described, and it's basically a story of an aspiring teenage reporter called Lil and her life in Pelican City, where there's no free press. So Lil is desperate to write for the only newspaper in Pelican City, which is a underground newspaper run by renegade reporters. And so she's always looking for a really big scoop so she can get onto the pages of this news gazette. And then one day she meets Nedley Stubbs, her partner in crime. And Nedley's a very mysterious boy that only Lil can see. And when she starts to investigate his story, she finds out that it affects the whole of the city that they live in. And in solving his crime, they unravel a whole web of other crimes and change the lives of everyone who lives in Pelican City and themselves.
Sounds great.
It does. They are great. I did some reading before we went live of everyone's books. I've already read all the Justice ones. They're fab. Before we went live, Mike Hemming asked, is there an age group defined for young adult? But your books really sort of are in the genre, the age range just below young adult, aren't they?
Yeah, is it called middle grade? I think it was new to me, although years and years ago, when I was in publishing, I was actually in children's publishing. I was editorial director at HarperCollins, so I should know, but I think everything's changed. And I think now it's called middle grade. So I would say the Justice books, which are about set in 1930s boarding school, about a girl called Justice who solves crimes, I would say they're sort of 8+. But actually, a lot of adults have liked them. So I reckon it's anyone who likes a good murder. What do you say, Sophie?
Yeah, I would say the same. Theoretically, mine are 9+, but I'm also a librarian, and I'm not a huge fan of age banding. So I think it's something which it makes a book easy to sell, maybe. But I kind of think readers upwards of as long as you kind of my books are quite creepy, and I guess they're sort of quite kind of sophisticated stories. So maybe not for a really young reader, but yeah, they are certainly pitched as middle grade.
And I think yours are great to read aloud as well, Sophie. I can imagine loving reading. I've only read the first one, but I just thought at the time, fab to read aloud. So maybe you could read them aloud to younger children.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I found when I've been reading them on school visits, the only problem is that quite often I don't say who said something. And that isn't a problem when you're reading the book, but when you do read it out loud, then you realise you have to make it really clear who said it by putting on a silly voice.
You do notice that when you're reading aloud, don't you? It's something I'm currently reading one of my books aloud on my Facebook page, one of my other series, and you do notice things and you're reading it. And I was reading one character, and then I said he had a very strong Cockney accent. Halfway through a sentence, I was like, yeah, my old China.
Yeah, you do. And I think actually it's a good rule of thumb for anyone who is a writer to read their books aloud before they send them off for the final time to the publisher, because you can also tell all sorts of kind of problems with the flow, or when you've repeated words and things like that from reading a book aloud. So yeah,
you absolutely notice the bits that drag, don't you? You think, my goodness, if I'm bored, I try and do that myself. As I think, if I'm bored reading it, and I wrote it, so
yeah,
cut that
a few pages. Yeah, absolutely.
Are your books available on audio?
Yeah, mine are really good reader whose name I've temporarily forgotten. Imogen Church, I think. I might have to double check it, but great reader, yeah.
Mine aren't, unfortunately. Yeah.
You should do them, Sophie. That would be really good.
Oh. Maybe. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it is great because I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I think it helps you maximize your reading, and yeah, and I would love for them to be in audio. I kind of imagine them read in a kind of gruff, sort of hard-boiled voice, which I maybe could do, but
It's funny though, isn't it, how important that is? Because in the summer, Andy and I drove to Cambridge and we listened to Nao Marsh's Opening Night, which is one of my favourite books, on audio on the way, because I was doing a talk on it and I thought, what good way to sort of reread it. And it's a book by a New Zealand woman about a New Zealand woman, and it was read by a posh British man. And you think, why? You know, and it totally, I was just thinking how different it would have sounded in a woman's voice. So, I mean, I think nowadays things are not that bad because this is a fairly sort of, you know, golden agey book. But I did think, wow, why choose a man?
yeah, and it would really change the feel of it, wouldn't it, to have it in the sort of New Zealand accent as well.
Completely a young woman's voice would have been so different. So, yeah, I have to say, Imogen, who reads the Justice books, she's an adult, but she has a very young sounding voice and a very, yeah, she sounds very like, I think, Justice might sound.
There's a question that we got before we went live from Lucy. She said, what inspired you all to write crime fiction for children? Should we start with Elly at the top?
Really it was the character came first. So as I said, I had written quite a few books for grown up crime. I won't say adult again because that just sounds a bit weird. So I'd written a sort of mainstream crime series about an archaeologist called Ruth Galloway, and I was actually on a train to Norfolk, and I suddenly thought of the title, A Girl Called Justice, and realized that it might be a girl going to boarding school for the first time trying to solve crimes. But you know how this has happened to me before, and I don't know if it's happened to you as well, Sophie. Afterwards, you realise what it's about. And of course, the books are about my mum. And she went to boarding school for the first time in 1936, which is when the books start. And my mum had been brought up by her dad, who was an actor. So single parent family was quite unusual then. And they didn't have a home or a base. They just travelled around the country at a different theatre every week. So one week they'd be in Scarborough, then they'd be in Edinburgh, then they'd be in Manchester. And so my mum just travelled with her dad. She had no schooling at all. But when she was about 11, he obviously thought she needed some schooling. So he sent her to boarding school. And you can imagine the shock. You know, she'd never been to school. She didn't know anyone her own age. Her friends were all sort of sword swallowers and gymnasts and chorus girls and things. And the first thing that matron at the school said to her was, you must never, ever talk about your father. And the reason for that was because he was an actor, and they just thought that was very infra-dig and lower class. And when I do school visits and I tell them that, they all say, but it's so cool to be an actor. And I say, well, I think that's cool. And in fact, my mum thought it was cool. But at the time, it was not something to be talked about. So afterwards, I realised that Justice was my mum. And just a very quick little spooky thing about that. Having sort of realised that myself, but never said it aloud to anyone, my mum used to write stories. About a schoolgirl spy because she was growing up in the war, and I guess that was the thing. And she wrote about a schoolgirl spy, and she was called Nan Laws, which was actually my mum's middle name. She was Sheila Nan Laws. And when the Justice books came out, I'm going to grab one in a minute and show you from the bookshelf. The illustration of Justice was so cool. She was so funny and so feisty looking. And I said to my editor, "This is such a good illustration. Can I write to the artist and thank her?" And my editor said, "Of course you can. She's a young woman. She lives in America. Her name's Nan Laws."
Oh, wow.
Wow.
So excuse me for half a second. I'm going to get the book. I'm coming back. Sorry, that took a bit of time.
Sophie?
Yeah, the question was what made us want to write crime for kids.
Yeah.
I just wanted to write a crime book, I think, and I love writing for kids. I only really write for kids. That's kind of my perfect zone, I guess, to be in. And I sort of started writing a story about a ghost. And then when I got to thinking about the ghost, I realized that ghost stories are always kind of ultimately crime stories. If you look at it as what happened before, they became a ghost. So yeah, and because it was austerity at the time I was writing it, we were kind of in the middle of austerity, and it all felt really bleak. And I found it really difficult to kind of process all of that. And writing something which is set in a very hard-boiled world, they were mostly set kind of just around the Depression in America, and there's prohibition and crime and corruption. And I felt like that was a really exciting way to think about something which was kind of horrible to think about. And a kind of world I wanted to be in, this very kind of battered glamour of the sort of noir hardboiled detectives. So I fell in love with that more than I kind of thought that I set out to write a crime book. I'm not sure I would have felt confident enough to write a crime book, because I always think it takes all the plotting. It seems daunting to me to try and come up with plots to detective novels. As a reader of them, I always feel like it must be a real brain ache.
Yes.
There is a question about your writing on the screen, actually. Someone said, did you set out with a plan in mind when you're writing your YA, or does it just pour out of you?
Well, with me, it has changed a bit. So when I first started writing crime novels, and I do totally agree with Sophie, sometimes the plot is just, makes your head want to explode. I used to just write I used to write a sort of chapter plan, just a few lines each chapter, but I did work it all out. I knew who did it and why. But as I've gone on, I've done less planning and written fewer words, so now I don't really do a written plan at all. It is in my head, but I do usually know how it's going to end up. I have changed it before, but usually I do know. What about you, Sophie?
Oh yeah, I'm a big planner. I find that because I'm an over plotter, and all my books all start off being so complicated. I found now that if I have a plan, it really reins me into what the story is supposed to be. Otherwise, I do kind of go off on lots of different sort of things that I enjoy about the world. I think so. I am obsessive planner now. In fact, when I wrote the Potkin and Stubbs books, I think I had like a vague plan. I had a really clear plan for the first book and what would happen at the end of the third book, and then it was a bit of a grey area in the middle. But the more I go on, the more I realise I have to do less drafts if I know at the beginning where I'm headed.
And do you ever check? Do the characters ever sort of seem to make their own decisions?
Yeah, they do, and that's one of the best things, isn't it, about writing? And I never feel obliged to stick to the plan if a better plan comes along. But I think it's useful for me, and also because I don't really write chronologically, so I just write whatever part of the story interests me at the time. So if I didn't, I could end up just wasting loads of time writing scenes that would never make it into a book, just because I thought they would be fun to write. So yeah, I think it really helps me to have the plan and then write the scenes, and then I kind of patchwork it in at the end.
That's so interesting. Oh, hi.
Am I visible?
Yes.
Oh my goodness, 15 minutes doing all that, but here I am. Sorry about that.
Do you want to just introduce yourself to our members while you're there, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm Thomas Taylor. I'm the author of Malamander, and God, with some camera, for grief. I'm the author of Malamander and the sequel Gargantis. Malamander won the Crime Fest prize for a children's novel earlier this year, and it's a kind of mystery whodunit centered around a supernatural plot. And I'm just very sorry I'm 15 minutes late, but I'm sure the rest of you have been keeping everybody entertained.
It's good to have you.
Yeah.
So we had some questions before we went live. There are some on the stream as well, but I'm going to ask you the ones from before. There's a couple of questions for you, Thomas, but I think everybody else can answer them as well. So there's one that says, with your background as an illustrator, are you tempted to turn Malamander or Gargantis into a graphic novel and provide your own illustrations?
That's an interesting question. I have thought of that, actually. I think Malamander would make a really good graphic novel, but I'm not tempted enough to actually do it, because I know from experience, having done a graphic novel just before Malamander, the last project I did was a graphic novel with Marcus Sedgwick, where he wrote it and I did all the drawing, and it took years. It just took a massive amount of time. And although I'm pleased with the result, I kind of feel like I'm already pleased enough with Malamander as a novel with a few drawings in it. So I don't think I would put the time in. I mean, it's a great idea.
I edited the Marcus Sedgwick book at HarperCollins.
Ah, okay, excellent. Yeah. If somebody else wanted to do it, I would probably give them my blessing if I like their art style. But I just don't think I'd rather write more novels. I could probably write 2 novels in the time it would take me to do the graphic novel, which is a hard truth of it.
Elly and Sophie, would you make graphic novels of yours?
I definitely would if I could draw, which I can't. But it's one of my. I love graphic novels as a reader. So yeah, if somebody could make Pelican City come alive as a graphic novel, yeah, I would absolutely love that. But like Thomas said, it's a really big investment in time, and the returns. I'm not sure what the returns are like for graphic novels. They're just labours of absolute love, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, it's luxury, I guess. But.
Pelican City would be brilliant in a graphic novel. It would just look amazing. It really would.
It really would be. But same here. I would do it just for the little thing of not being able to draw. And in fact, my mum, who the Sort of Justice books are based on, was an artist, and she was a fashion artist. But she did work on some sort of early Disney illustrations, so she could do that. So she could have done them. That would have been. But when I was just saying that, before I was a full-time writer, I used to be an editor and I worked for HarperCollins. And when I was there, I commissioned a series of graphic novels in the educational division. First time they'd had any. And I just fell in love with the form because it's so interesting. And we had some amazing illustrators and books. And they were just wonderful because I hadn't understood the language of them and the sequencing. And it was so fascinating. But I can quite see, Thomas, why it takes so long. These were quite short and they took a long time.
Yeah. I always say to people, think about how long it takes to write the word elephant, and then think about how long it takes to draw that elephant, and you magnify that across a whole story, and you see that a graphic novel is a massive investment of time, even though they are really beautiful to look at.
And I think crime novels as well. I was sent I'm afraid another book whose name I've forgotten, but I'll put it on the text later on. I was sent a beautiful crime graphic novel recently, and it looks so good. And I think it's a really interesting format for crime, isn't it? But yeah, it takes as long as an actual crime.
Yeah, I've got to say, I imagine like Pelican City being a bit like Sin City. When I was reading it.
Oh, me too. I think from my point of view, I mean, though I genuinely would love for Popular Stuff to be a graphic novel, or for like, you know, a spin-off or sequel, anything. I do find some books can only be told as graphic novels. That's like the best way to tell that story is using kind of graphic novel format. So I kind of would almost prefer to do a different story in that world, because I just think it's such a great form for telling some kinds of stories in certain ways. So yeah, but you know,
when I was editing the series which were called Comets, that's right. That one of the things that came out in the research was that they were looking at some reluctant readers, but even readers who were not at all confident with text, they could all understand like a sort of curly bubble was thinking and a non-curly one was speaking, and there was this kind of graphic language that was so interesting, really.
Totally.
So we've got a couple of questions from one of our admins, Lucy Sampson. Her daughter Bea loves reading. She's met Thomas and Elly, I think, at an event.
She has.
Yeah, so she's got some
in Europe, I believe.
Yeah, she has questions for you, and I think they apply to all of you, really. She says, Thomas, is there going to be a follow-up to Gargantis? And Elly and Sophie, how many books do you plan in your series? And she hopes there's going to be a lot more as she really enjoys them.
Well, for the Erie Sea series, the Legend of Erie Sea, I've already finished book 3, which is called Shadowghast, and I'm planning 5 books in the series. So I'm about to start book 4. I've kind of started it already, so that's I hope that's a good answer. Hope the world wants that many.
Ellie?
Well, I've just finished book 3, and hi B, it was great to meet you in Newark, wasn't it? And thank you for being such a keen reader and keen reviewer as well. So I finished book 3 in the Justice series. It's called The Ghost in the Garden, and it'll be out next year in May 2021. And I'd planned there would be 4 books in the series, because what I wanted to do was to bring it up to the war, because I thought it'd be very interesting to write about Justice's school in the war. And as I was saying earlier on, Justice is kind of based on my mum. And in the war, my mum's whole school was evacuated with a boys' school. So just the possibilities of that makes me want to do that. So in my head, there will be 4 Justice books, but I only intended there to be 3 Ruth books, and now there are 13. So who knows?
Sophie, how many Popcorn and Stubbs books?
There's just going to be the 3, because that's just how long, that's the story. The story was told in the 3 books. So I would maybe in the future look to doing some maybe prequels, because I would love to go back to that world, but I'm a great believer in only telling the story for as long as that story exists, if you know what I mean. I would not be a very good series writer, because I don't have I get bored really easily. I can't even read consecutive books in a series, because I have to kind of swap things around too much. So yeah, I just don't think I can keep going for that long with a story.
Just before Thomas materialised, you said something that I was really interested in, Sophie, because you said you didn't write consecutively. And I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that, because it seems to sort of link into that.
Yeah, everyone thinks that's strange, but I kind of feel like it's when you're writing a story, when you've got an idea for a story, sometimes the scene you imagine first isn't the first scene in the book. And you have to kind of decide where you're going to kind of start your story and where you're going to end your story. And I think so I often don't start at the beginning, but also I don't like writing bits that I'm not interested in. So what I do is I write all the chapters that I like whenever I get a good idea for a chapter. Like if I've just watched a really spooky film, then I might be really spooked out and think I'm going to write one of the scary scenes now. And then when I've finished and I've done all the things I really like, I try not to have any filler scenes. So I just decide I'll try and jump between those scenes without the kind of what I would consider to be a kind of filler chapter. And I just find that's more exciting for me, because there's nothing worse than getting stuck in a chapter and just thinking, oh, I have to write this chapter because I need it, but I don't really want to, because actually it's not till the end of the story you realise what chapters you do and don't need. So yeah, that just really works for me. So.
What about you, Thomas? So you do you start at the beginning and go to the end, or?
Oh yeah, I do, and I can't help myself fiddling and editing as I go. So I am quite slow. I go back all the time. But it's true. It's funny what Sophie's just said about those chapters, because you do arrive at those moments where you just have to get the characters from here over to there, and it's nice when they can just be zapped there and you can skip out. But sometimes something has to happen and you have to show it, and you think, oh, good grief, this is boring me, so it's not going to excite the reader. And it gets really frustrating. And in fact, when I submitted the text for Shadowghast, the third book, and it was past the deadline, it was over, it's going to be proofread and everything now. And I had this niggling feeling that there were 2 chapters where there only needed to be 1. And I had to sort of go back to publishers and say, I can't get this feeling out of my brain that these 2 chapters could be 1, and I can cut 700 or so words, and please let me do it. And they did let me do it. So I was able to go in and surgically connect these 2 together. So I did miss that one, but I see exactly what you mean, Sophie, and where you have to sort of work out whether you really want to bore the reader with a transition phase or not, whether you can see a way around it.
And it's just so hard to get them in and out of a room, isn't it, really? You just want to sat. But I heard Frank Cottrell Boyce talking once, and he's a brilliant script writer, and he also scripted the London Olympics opening ceremony. So it's really interesting. And he said nobody comes out of a film saying what a good story arc. They always come out saying, what about that scene? You know, nobody comes out The Godfather saying, what a good story arc. They say, oh, what about that scene at the wedding? What about that scene? So I think, you know, there's nothing wrong with thinking of the amazing scenes and missing out the in-between bits.
Yeah.
I am start at the beginning and go to the end person. But like you, Thomas, I'm always going back through it and cutting out bits. I'm a great cutter. I used to be an editor. And I think so quite often my editor says to me, we need more. And because it's my instinct to just take those bits out all the time. Which is why my books are quite short.
It's when your editor writes, how did they get here? That you know that you're going to have to do something.
Or else something my editor sometimes says to me is it still Thursday? Because you forget the day, don't you? Just everything happens on one day.
It's been Thursday for an awful long time.
Always Thursday.
Yeah.
So we've got a question from Judy Dakin. She says, setting aside graphic novels, how important are the illustrations in a YA novel, and up to what age group do you think? I like illustrations in any book, personally. I think if they add something to it, why shouldn't they even be in an adult novel?
I agree 100%. I think, you know, all books should probably be illustrated. I mean, they don't have to be, but they could be. I think that for me, because mine was illustrated by Carl James Mountford, who's an illustrator I've always loved. And I couldn't believe my luck when I got him as my illustrator. And one of probably the best bit, because I didn't have to do anything for it, but also because it was just so exciting and new for me, was to see the pictures that he had come up with to accompany the text. It was just so exciting. And I think, you know, there's no doubt these books have sold on the covers. So, you know, I think illustration is, only now are people really starting to address how unbalanced the relationship between illustrators and authors have been in terms of the publicity. But yeah, it's absolutely, I think it makes a book, definitely.
And if you think about it, Dickens's books were illustrated, weren't they? And Crookshank was almost as famous as he was. And we think about those books, we think about, so I'm totally with you, Kaz. I'd love to see the Ruth books illustrated. I'd love that, you know. It would be amazing, because as Sophie says, the moment when you see somebody bringing your character to life really is a wonderful one.
Yeah, and I think there's also an interesting question about how a book can be illustrated, because there's a decorative and evocative approach, or there's a very literal approach where the characters are all depicted, and which I think is possibly a little passé now. I don't like to draw my characters, even though I've done illustrations for Malamander. They're just meant to evoke. They're only chapter headings. They're just meant to evoke a sense of the town and a sense of the place and the story. And I don't really want to ever draw the Malamander or draw Herbie or Violet, because I think it's very important to leave something to the imagination. So I do think there's quite a fine line to walk between those two. And it's interesting that in the US, Malamander in the US is quite heavily illustrated by Tom Booth, who's done a brilliant job. But he was asked just draw everyone. So, the Malamander, the characters, they're all just drawn. And it works really well. But I personally, I think I tend towards wanting to use illustrations to evoke. And you can do that. You could really do that in anything, really. I mean, you could take one of Elly's great books, and you could do sort of Norfolk. You could evoke the countryside around in Norfolk and the town of Norwich in these brilliant little and Folio Society is really good at doing books like that. They will take the time to illustrate them quite sympathetically. And
I don't know if you don't like to be asked the Harry Potter question, Thomas, but did you, because you have illustrated Harry Potter, what do you feel about the fact that some people, when they think of Harry Potter, they will think of your illustration?
Well, I've got used to it now. I mean, I'm contacted all the time about Harry Potter. I mean, I get people all the time. I mean, every week I get an email from somebody or a request or something, and I just got used to it now. But for a long time, it just dominated everything else I did so much that it was just annoying. Because I just did the cover art, really. I mean, that's it. It was just the cover art. But I'm much more relaxed about it now, and a lot of the people who like Harry Potter and who've been interested in my connection with it have actually read Malamander and got back to me about that as well. So there's a bit of fold over between the two, which is nice. But it just goes to show how important the cover is. And as Sophie was saying about selling on the basis of cover, lots and lots, you'll see it on Instagram all the time. Somebody will photograph a book and say, this was a cover buy. I bought this because the cover is amazing. But then I loved it when I read it. And so covers are just, it's so important. And I didn't do the cover of Malamander. I wanted to. I just got bogged down in just how it's not easy, and I haven't done any colour work for a long time like that. And I just was quite relieved when they took it away from me and gave it to George Ermos to do, because he's just brilliant and he's created a fantastic cover. And I'm just pleased I could have spoilt my own book by doing a bad bit of cover art. I mean, I don't know, but it could have happened. So the covers are so important these days.
There was a question about covers actually from TG. She says, when the covers are designed, how do you draw in the YA market? How much of a say do you all have in your covers?
Oh, well, I mean, I had quite a lot of say in mine, but at the end of the day, I still I stepped back a bit too. I sort of thought, well, George is, and he knows what he's doing. So I had some feedback on it, but and there were some things about colour of hair and all that sort of thing, tiny details. But I was happy to let someone who knew what he was doing do it.
I remember when I was an editor, the words that struck fear into your heart were, "Oh, the author doesn't like the cover," and or worse. No, the worst thing was, for some reason, it's like it was often phrased as the author's wife or the author's husband doesn't like it. You think, why? I don't care. So as an author, I have tried to remember that, and to remember that, in fact, as Sophie was saying, the cover is a selling tool for the book, and it belongs to sales and marketing, really. It doesn't really belong to you as the author. So you can obviously have your feedback, and publishers nearly always say, here's the cover, everyone here loves it. What you say.
No pressure. Yeah.
It's a brave author to say, well, I don't. And, sometimes, and I think Quercus have done amazing covers for all my books, and the Justice books are published by Hachette Kids, which is part of the same sort of group, and I've loved them all. But there have been occasions where I've said, and I can just imagine the cover art meeting saying, oh, no, Ellie's got some awful idea now. I want my cat to draw it or something. But, generally speaking, they are for sales and marketing, really, aren't they? Sophie.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I got sent the roughs just to say this is the kind of look we're going for, and I absolutely loved the look, and all this is the colours that we're going for. Carl said that he'd based the colour themes on 80s sweets, which was just so cool. I was just blown away by them, because I don't because it's not something I'm really that good at, but I do. I mean, I work in libraries. We know covers are the things which tell people whether or not this book's likely to be for them. And I just felt so excited that my book would be behind one of his covers. So, yeah, luckily.
Sorry, Sophie, I was going to say there are subliminal messages in covers, aren't there? It always fascinates me with crime fiction in general, because you're getting so many messages from a crime cover. For example, you are getting how much violence there is in there. You can tell from the cover, and just from the typeface and from the look of it, and the sort of crime novel it is, police procedural, or mine have a sort of geographically sort of Norfolk-y, as Thomas was saying earlier, sort of spooky Norfolk feel, you can tell so much from the cover, you really can.
Someone on here would love to see a Gus cover. It just comes up.
Well, there he is. There's Gus there. He's faded into the background. Yeah, Thomas and I were talking. Thomas had his dog when we were talking earlier on. We were saying that there are demons. So Gus is definitely my demon. Yeah, not enough cat. I think Gus's comment would be not enough cats on the covers. Although my covers are so different. Like, look, here's got it. This is Dying Fall, isn't it? Aren't they different? And one of them has an owl on it that looks very like Gus.
There was a question before we went live that I think is excellent. It says, how do you know how to pitch the crime just right for your audience, giving children enough excitement and tension without damaging their souls? I just liked how it was worded. Should we start with Elly at the top?
Oh, what is such a great question, isn't it? And you do think about it. Well, you know, I'm sure we all do. And also, when you're going around schools, as again we all used to do when you could do such things, I was always aware of the fact that you can't just go into school and say murder's fun, isn't it? Because you know some people might have experienced murder and it's not fun. So I think in terms of how I pitched it, I didn't pitch it very differently from my adult books, because if anyone has read my adult books, I don't go in for sort of graphic violence or much sort of, you know, description of violence. So I didn't sort of need to cut that down. I had to cut out the sex, obviously, almost. That is in my adult books. But it was more, I did try and concentrate on a sort of gothic feeling, and that sort of feeling of being in I love books, not just crime, any books that are set in a sort of enclosed world. And I think that's something I've loved from your book, Sophie and Thomas, as well. It is a sense of a world there. So I wanted to make the school that world. So I think when I was writing the Justice books, I decided to concentrate on the sort of gothicness of the school, this awful mansion that rears up out of the moors, out of the marshes. Yeah, I've just been reading Wuthering Heights, actually. It rears up out of the marshes and is a sort of character in its own way. So I started to pile on the gothic atmosphere, if you like. And yes, there is murder, and murder is horrible, but I tried to concentrate on sort of atmosphere and then on the solving of the crime. But there's no easy answer, I don't think.
Thomas?
Yeah, well, in Malamander, because it's not a straightforward crime. It's more of a mystery novel, and so it doesn't start with the body being found or anything like that. But you what could have happened and what's suggested can go quite far. And in fact, when I first submitted it, I was told to take some blood out, please, because it was quite a bit more kind of gore and horror in there. And yeah, I think it's an interesting balance. You have to find the right spot. Things have to, you know, peril has to feel real, but you don't want to traumatize a younger readership. Because I mean, my books aren't even YA; they're middle grade, and they have to sort of come in at the right pitch where you're not scaring a 9-year-old, but you're keeping them engaged, and you're generally making them sort of wonder what will happen next and keep them. And you do need a bit of an edge, but you don't need the edge to be too cutting. And so that's a difficult balance to find, especially if you're used to writing for an older age group. But I have, thinking about the graphic novel again, I have often wondered about rewriting Malamander as a horror story, because it is basically a horror story that I've pitched for children, so it's not so horrific, but it could easily be a horror story. But I'll never have time to do that. But it's an idea.
Yeah, I do think that it's not something I thought about a lot, actually. Being very new to the business, I just wrote the books I wanted to write, and then I let the publisher worry about where it should be pitched. And originally they did think maybe a bit older, and then they kind of thought, actually, no, I think we can probably get away with it middle grade. So, I mean, I don't know. When I've been on school visits, I'm constantly surprised how grisly children are. And I think sometimes there's something to be said for having something which is frightening in a manageable way, being able to experience fear and horror. And, you know, loads of kids do love frightening books, you know, Stephen King, Goosebumps and all that kind of stuff. I think I wanted it to be scary, but I wanted it to be scary in a thrilling way. And I wanted there to be... wanted it to be dark. It's a dark place where they are. So I it sounds a bit of a cop out. I let the editor worry about that. I just wrote the story, and then I let them kind of pick me up on the bits. And there were some bits where they sort of said, maybe tone that down a bit. But I find that adults are much more creeped out by it than children are. I think maybe because adults see the consequences of things more, and kids, I think, are more willing to be maybe frightened in a gleeful way, if that makes sense. So yeah, I didn't.
I think you're sorry, Sophie, I was just saying, I think you're right about sort of having fear in a contained way can be quite healthy. And I think also judicious use, and I know you two do that, judicious use of sort of humour and of the sort of feeling sort of safe with the character who's telling the story. So, you know, I hope there are funny bits in my book that, you know, make people think, oh, you know, that's okay. Justice is making a bit of a joke. It's all right. Because there is humor in that sort of noir world of yours, Sophie, definitely.
Yeah, that is definitely something which I couldn't have written it without the humor, I don't think. For my sake, I couldn't have done. And that was something that when I was going through the editing process, they were keen for the humor to kind of counterbalance the darkness. But that's probably my normal setting, is humor counterbalancing darkness. So that's a good natural fit for me.
I think it's a really powerful combination, actually. It can really drive a story forward if you've got that sense of being safe in certain places and with certain people, but a real sense of peril outside of that, and you can move between the two. I think that's a very powerful technique. It works really well in your Popkin and Stubbs books.
And I think, as you were saying about the sort of horror genre, Thomas, in some horror films, like you think of the sort of Hammer House of Horror, there is some humour there, isn't there? Sometimes there really is. And I always think of that bit in Macbeth where Duncan's been murdered and somebody comes in and says, oh, it's the most terrible night and everything awful's happening, all stars are coming out of the heavens, Duncan's horses are eating each other, and Macbeth says, aye, 'twas a rough night. And I think that's meant to be funny. I really do think that's meant to be funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the last question we had before we went live was, did any of your childhood reading influence your writing? So we start with you, Elly.
Okay, yeah, well, yes, definitely. And I was thinking really of Enid Blyton recently, and the fact that those are crime novels. Absolutely, definitely, they're crime novels. And there was an Enid Blyton book called The Rillaby Fair Mystery that I read when I was young, that really is a really good crime novel. And there's a scene in it which involves, I won't tell anybody in case anyone wants to read it or give anything away, but it involves stuffed animals and their glass eyes gleaming in the dark. And, you know, Enid Blyton is a much criticised writer and often rightly criticised, but in this, it is actually a very good crime novel, very good clue, and that's a really scary scene. So definitely I've been very influenced by the books I read as a child, and also I had a real Agatha Christie stage, and I wrote my first full-length crime novel when I was 11, and it was called The Hair of the Dog, which must have been something my parents talked about.
I wonder what that could mean. Yeah.
Thomas?
Well, I mean, I think I'm certainly influenced by fantasy writers I used to read as an older child. But also latterly, I mean, I've gone back and read, because I read to my own children. I read Winnie the Pooh, and in fact, it might sound unlikely, but that there's a sort of tone that you find in Winnie the Pooh of humour and use of language that I've always found really quite. It's very gentle and soft, and you might walk over it, but it's that I've brought that deliberately into my books, into the voice of Herbie, who narrates the whole story. So it's sort of in the DNA of the book a little bit. The slight A.L. Milne sort of sense of how somebody would speak, and that slightly Eeyore-esque kind of look on the world. But in terms of my own reading, I've read a lot of crime fiction, again, as an older child and teenager, a lot of sort of golden age crime fiction, and I've always enjoyed that sort of very structured setup that you get in a crime novel. So I suppose that's in there as well.
I used to read a lot of Enid Blyton when I was young, mainly because my mum really loved Enid Blyton, and so she wanted me to have those books. And a lot of Roald Dahl, and really I was obsessed with reading as soon as I could read. So I used to reread a lot, which I just don't ever do now because it's too many books to read. But I reread some quite strange books people bought us, you know. And also I think I was going to say I had an Edward Gorey pop-up book called The Dwindling Party, about these people who go on a trip around a stately home, and they'll get picked off by kind of weird dinosaurs until there's one child left, and I was obsessed with that book. My nephew's obsessed with it.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's really weird, but my parents had a different. Now I think people worry a lot about what dark or frightening things, what effect it will have on children, and who knows what effect it had on me. But my parents weren't worried about that at all. So they were also like folk singers. and they used to sing some really dark folk songs. And we used to live in a house right in the middle of some really dark, creepy woods. And they used to make up all sorts of stories about those. And also had a childhood which had a lot of theatre in it. And I'm obsessed with film. So I guess every kind of storytelling, I feel like every kind of storytelling is really impacted on how I tell stories now. And yeah, so I kind of think reading's been one of them. Definitely, it's my main source of stories. But yeah, all kind of other ways have kind of filtered in a dark way.
I loved reading to my kids, as Thomas says, and I totally agree about Winnie the Pooh. There's that lovely tone, isn't it? Something he says, isn't it cleverness? That's something rabbit can do. I always think of that.
Yeah.
It's such a good line, but I was surprised the extent in which I love scaring my kids. I love telling them ghost stories, and in The Stranger Diaries, which is my standalone novel, there's a kind of ghost story that runs through it, and that's based on something I used to tell them. And actually, I sometimes worry about myself that I found that so much fun to really frighten them with the stories. Didn't do them any harm though; they're fine.
Children are very resilient, actually.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they're talking about.
Yeah, they know the difference between fiction and reality as well, and they can be scared by a book, but when the book's closed, then they can leave that fear and pick it up again next time they next read it.
I think also when you're a kid, the things that frighten you aren't necessarily the things that an adult would think of as frightening. I remember when I was a kid watching the film of Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, the animation, and being absolutely terrified of Mr. Tumnus. I used to have nightmares about Mr. Tumnus. Not the not the witch or anything like that. It was just, I think sometimes, and Will o' the Wisp, I was terrified of Will o' the Wisp. So I think sometimes when you're a kid, you hook your terror onto something unpredictable, and then that becomes the thing.
That's brought back to me, Sophie. I was really terrified, and this ages me, so anyone my age, isn't it? I was terrified by a Benny Hill song about Ernie the ghostly milkman. Has anyone heard that? And it's meant to be funny, and it terrified me. There was a thing about Ernie's ghostly gold tops were rattling in their crates. Oh my God!
That does ring a bell, actually. I think I have heard that.
Some old program somewhere, Thomas. But my parents were a bit like yours, Sophie. I remember I really liked Christopher Lee as a child, and my mum used to take me to see Dracula films, and I loved those. I just thought they were fun. But oh my God, Ernie's ghostly gold tops. It was scary.
It's funny what can be scary. My youngest son can't watch Wallace and Gromit. He finds the whole stop motion animation plasticine thing really creepy. He just hates it.
Oh. And often children are scared of, I remember taking my kids to Brewster Bear or something, and scared of people dressed up as a bear or something, and quite rightly, really.
Yeah.
A bit creepy. I used to think that book characters came alive when you weren't looking at them when I was a child. So if I read anything scary, I'd stack books on top of it so they couldn't escape.
Get out.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Very wise.
We've got time for one last question, I think, before we do a bit of a recap of your book. So Alex says, we'll finish off with the UK CBC most popular question. What are your most memorable moments as an author?
The fact that I'm struggling.
So we'll start with Thomas.
Oh gosh, well, I think the fact that I am struggling to remember anything is quite. I mean, I've had some great experiences on calls and things, but I think, to be honest, I found a stone on the beach. I think I might have talked. I don't know whether I've talked about this before. If anyone's heard this before, but I found a pebble on the beach that had a shape in it at a time when I was writing Malamander, and the shape looks like a white cat, and it's unmistakably a white cat. I should have had it here. Really. I could have held it up, and it was quite extraordinary to find that. And I was just walking on the beach, kind of, oh, you've got a stone there, and it was a hole for it, a hagstone. But as soon as I found it, I thought, there needs to be a white cat in my story. And so I went home and I wrote him in, and this is Erwin the cat, who's just grown in importance throughout the books, and he's going to be quite key to the whole thing. And I literally had no idea he would be in the book until I found that stone, and now I can't imagine writing the books without him in. So just for me, the sense of how fragile ideas are and how it can go either way, and random events can send you spinning off in some new direction is quite a memorable and quite sobering thought, really.
Sophie?
Yeah, because I mean, my first book only came out last year, so I still feel like every new author thing that can happen, like the first time you have a shop window or the first time you see your book in a shop, I thought I'd really love going in bookshops and seeing my book on the shelf, but I'm so worried it's not going to be there that I never do it, and I never go and say hello, which I really should do, because bookshop people are always lovely. But yeah, so I think I've had a lot of new experiences in a year, of good and more challenging ones. But the main thing is, I think, just the thought that somebody, it's one of the things that's really good about social media, someone you've never met will contact you and say, I really loved your book. You know, it's just amazing. So yeah, that's every time that happens, that's amazing.
I think that's exactly it, Sophie. You know, I've now published 25 books, and I have to say, still the same. Still don't like going to bookshops. I love going to bookshops, but still don't like to look for my book in case it's not there. And sometimes it isn't. You know, I still never go up and say hello, though you should, as you said. Book people are lovely. I'm still, and I hate to tell you, but I get more scared with each book when they come out and people don't like it. And now it is paralyzing, the fear before a book comes out. On a happier note, but I did the most. I had a really great moment this year, if you forgive me for saying it, when I was sitting in my little shed where I'm here, my writing shed at the top of the garden, and it was raining, and I was here with Gus, and I heard that I'd won the Edgar for Best Crime Novel in America. Stranger Diaries, and that was just a great moment, because I'd expected to be there at some sparkling ceremony and I wasn't, but in some ways it was even better. I don't know, I was just there and I found out, and I went down and told the family, and we all had a group hug, and it was really, really nice. But the thing I really do remember is when the Crossing Places came out, which is the first Ruth book, and you know, it didn't, you know, wasn't a massive bestseller or anything like that, but it was a kind of sort of word of mouth thing, and I was invited to do a library event at a library near me in Brighton, and it was just, I just thought nobody would be there. Who would come? And it wasn't like it was packed out, but there were people there who'd come because they really liked the book. And I remember there was like a little argument between two people in the room about something in the book, between Ruth and Nelson, and the fact they were arguing about my characters, that just felt amazing. It felt amazing that a handful of people come out on a cold night to talk about characters I'd invented, and that never goes away. That never goes away.
And that's a bit like what Kaz has just said about could characters come alive when you're not watching? And in a sense, what you just described, Elly, they sort of do. They live outside. You've invented them and you've written the book, but then they have a life outside the book, and they're affecting other people, and people are carrying those characters around in their heads now, and that's a strange and sort of kind of magical feeling, really.
It's absolutely magical, but I tell you what is quite weird is if you ever read fan fiction of your books.
I haven't seen any of that mine.
It's wonderful and a compliment, but some of it you not want to watch.
Well, I can imagine.
Does fan fiction exist of your books?
Oh yeah, Ruth and Nelson, all the things they don't get up to in the books, they get up to somewhere.
Okay. We've got 5 minutes left. Shall we finish off with a quick recap of you and all of your books? Shall we start? We'll start with Thomas first, since she came last.
Yeah, I'm very sorry about that. Yeah, so I have a kind of backstory as an illustrator primarily. So I have got quite a lot of picture books and this graphic novel, but in terms of writing, I have written a few things before, but really Malamander is like a kind of new start for me, and it sets a new direction, and I think I will stay in this kind of middle grade channel for quite a while. I have ideas stacked up ready for when the 5 books in the Irion Sea series are over. So I mean, I kind of see myself writing primarily middle grade from now on, and it's been a great, really exciting time. Malamander was only published in May last year, but was instantly on publication month, Waterstone's Book of the Month, which is just an amazing experience to kind of be published straight into something like that. And I'm just so lucky, really. I'm fortunate that I had that beginning ahead of the pandemic, because I mean, so many authors are launching their first book in the teeth of the lockdown, and I mean, it would have been just such a different experience. And so that's me, really. I write them, and I draw the maps and draw the inside black and white line drawings, and have a nice old time writing all my funny stories, and intend to carry on doing that as long as I can. So that's me, and it's nice to be on a crime in a crime group like this, chatting about it, because I don't see myself primarily writing crime. I see more of mystery, but I do often have, something's happened, and whodunit is a factor of what I write, and but it's fun to see that having that recognition from the Crime Fest prize was really exciting for me. It's a shame I couldn't go. Like Elly said, there was no way to go, but so that's me.
Sophie?
Yes, so Sophie Green, writer of the Potkin and Stubbs books. I've got them here again. Oh, whoa, there they are. The first one came out in 2019, and the last one came out in March 2020, which is a great time.
Great.
Release of it. And yeah, they are hard-boiled crime for kids. I was really excited to be asked onto this panel, and also I'm really proud to have written a crime book or crime series, because I think children's fiction sometimes gets lumped in as if it's all just one kind of book. I love genre fiction, all different genres, and it felt like a real accomplishment to have been recognised as a crime writer. So yeah, they're my books. I am working on something else now, which isn't a crime book. I'm working on a science fiction novel, because I love science fiction too. So but I plan to stay in middle grade, or maybe up slightly. I don't know. I think I'll worry about that afterwards. But it's the story. This is the story that counts.
Hi, I'm Elly Griffiths. As I was just saying, sounding like the old man of the sea, I've written 25 books, published 25 books, obviously written more. First 4 published under my real name, which is Domenica De Rosa, and which were kind of sort of described as women's fiction, literary fiction, about sort of families, relationships, Italy. Had an idea for a crime novel, that was The Crossing Places, and started the series of Dr. Ruth Galloway books, and along the way became Elly Griffiths, because I was told I needed a crime name, and genuinely expected to be Elly Griffiths for just that one book, and had not realized how long that would go on. So now obviously much better known as Elly Griffiths, written the Dr. Ruth Galloway series, the Brighton Mysteries, 2 standalones, Stranger Diaries and Postscript Murders, which was out this month, and also 2 middle grade murder mysteries, A Girl Called Justice and Justice and the Smuggler's Secret, and there'll be another one out in May. And I've loved this panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've got some comments in the stream that say it's been a brilliant and lovely way to spend an hour on a Sunday morning from some of the viewers, and they've all said thank you as well. You've been a fab panel. And thanks so much for joining us and for giving me pleasure for reading your books in preparation for the panel.
Well, thank you for reading them.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for inviting us on.
Yeah, thank you. Happy Sunday.
Indeed. Yeah.